Accessible Arts acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders, past and present, and recognise their enduring connection to this land, its culture, and its communities. We honour the long history of storytelling, cultural exchange, and artistic expression that has flourished here for thousands of years. Personally, I would like to acknowledge disabled and deaf First Nations people. Always was, always will be. Hello and welcome to Access Ideas and Insights podcast, brought to you by Accessible Arts. I'm Daley Rangi and I'll be your host for the next 6 episodes. For any Accessible Arts fans out there, you might have guessed that this podcast was developed as an extension of our Access Ideas and Insights hybrid series. That means we're keeping the bold conversations going, diving into fresh ideas and tackling the big questions around access and inclusion across the arts sector. Each episode, I'll be joined by leading experts, including artists with disability to cultural sector influencers. This podcast is a new initiative for Accessible Arts, and from the start, access has been at the core of its creation. As part of this development, we've worked closely with the Deaf Advisory Group to ensure this series is reaching our audiences. Each episode will be released with a transcript, Auslan video, and captions. Accessible Arts acknowledges access is a place of learning. So, throughout this series, we'll continue to develop the access for the podcast so that we can be a catalyst for change within the arts and cultural sector. This episode contains themes of ableism, trauma, isolation, marginalisation. In this episode, we turn our attention to the theme of reclaiming words. We're reflecting on how artists with disability are crafting language that honours pride, identity, and lived experience on their own terms. We're joined by 2 remarkable guests, Daley Rangi, Māori shapeshifter and anti-disciplinary artist, and Eliza Hull, musician, writer, journalist, and disability advocate. Together, we will explore how language can be reclaimed and reshaped, becoming a powerful tool for expression, resistance, and connection. First up, Daley Rangi. Daley, so awesome to chat to you today. Thank you for joining us online. I'm very excited to talk to you. You know, you're a very proud Māori artist, or anti-disciplinary artist, I think is something that you use quite often, and I personally love that term. I also wanted to speak to the fact that you've described yourself as a shapeshifter and that anti-disciplinary artist. Can you tell us what, that means to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I did steal anti-disciplinary artists from someone else, and I can't remember who I stole it from. But that's just citational practice at the end of the day, isn't it? Honouring what's come before. For me, anti-disciplinary, I use it because things like multidisciplinary didn't quite make sense for me, because I think being an artist and being a storyteller and kind of honouring my ancestors, multidisciplinary is just the norm. For me, I find that everyone's multidisciplinary. Whether if they're a writer, they're still doing something else in their lives. Everyone's got these various disciplines. The way I use it is really to speak to the fact that I think I spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to say with my work, and whether I'm even the right person to say it, and who I'm going to say it with, and how I'm going to research it, and all of these layers of preparation before I think about the way it's going to be presented. So I never approach something going, oh, I'm going to write a poem, or I'm going to write a novel, or I'm going to write a play, or I'm going to paint a picture. I'm thinking about, what is it that's haunting me at the moment? What do I feel is haunting the world? What brings me joy? What brings me rage? And then, maybe I'll spend a few months thinking about that and kind of talking about it and researching. And then I think the way in which it will come into the world will manifest itself. So I write poetry, I'm working on a novel, I write plays, I've painted. I scrawl things in the dirt, like I sit around fires telling stories. I think that's anti-disciplinary, I think, can feel very cynical in that way, perhaps, which is why I also use the term shapeshifter. And I think that also pays homage to the fact that I'm always changing and the world's always changing. So to kind of sit still in one place, doesn't pay respect to that.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned, just now that you've kind of work across all these different art mediums and languages and ways of expression, performance, visual arts, writing, scrawling in dirt, as you said. Yeah, I'm very curious about how do you use these forms to sort of, subvert or reframe language?
yeah. I mean, language is complex, right? I mean, that's an understatement, I think. And it's the thing I'm talking about with shapeshifting. Language is always changing, and I think it's almost changing too fast for us to comprehend. But I think for me, language is about power. Um, who's deciding what we say and how we say it? Because I think on a base, human to human, artist to artist, living being to non-human, like I think we're always communicating. But when it comes to ideas of language, I find it can be very attached to power. So I think even in regards to identity, like I didn't decide what language is used. Um, uh, People who came before me decided the kind of language that I use today to communicate with my communities or to society at large. Because I think for me, language is really a way of just communicating for the world and the world to communicate back to you. The way that you use language to describe yourself might actually not be what's really inside you, but you trying to turn that chaos of yourself into some order. So I think for me, I really like exploring the way in which you can kind of play with language and trick language and fiddle with language. I think even in regards to writing, um, a lot of my works on paper are written the same way I might speak them. So there's a work I did called Takatapui, which is coming back later in the year, actually, the Gadigal country. And that works it's about, kind of a very specific event that happened to me many years ago. But the way I speak it is the way I'm talking now. It's not a kind of higher, clearer language. It's me just communicating the internal. But then the way I've written on paper is to honor that as well. There's, you know, there's no in a word like morning, for example, there's no G at the end of the morning because I don't say that when I speak it. And I think it can be really fun to actually use forms like writing to explore how language is spoken. And I think, really challenge um, language and who decides what language we use. Because I think we all kind of have that policing inside us of a policing of language, which can be important when it comes to harmful language. But I think we always have to be careful about how language is policed as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be curious when people ask you about like your favorite ways to kind of challenge or subvert language or reframe it. It's difficult when it's something rather intuitive to you because of your identities and how they
Yeah,
inherently counter, the Western frame of making, kind of a lot of the institutional opportunities to perform your work. So I think that would be really interesting. And I feel
yeah,
like something that even just witnessing your work, I think there's something very universal in the specificity of your work. I think that's really interesting is how you steep it in, your lived experience, your language, cultural ties, intersectional cultural ties, and how that so supersedes exactly barriers of understanding. And I'm just curious with
yeah.
that, what sort of joy you get from challenging and playing with it? What are the forms that just kind of spark excitement in you as a
Yeah.
shapeshifter?
I mean, I think for me, it's that thing where I do write, but even the concept of writing the works that are in my head or the ideas or turning them into something feels like I'm doing it for a specific audience, because I think ultimately I would love to not have to write any of my works down, but actually to be like to carry those inside me. Like the work Takatapui, for example, is a story that I could tell right now off the cuff. And I think that's what, like, those are the most interesting stories I find from people. When everyone's got a story to tell, I do always like to remind everyone that, everyone's an artist or a storyteller in that way. I just have a certain privilege to engage with that as my day to day. But even like talking like right now, I am having to be very aware of making my language right now as accessible as possible or clear as possible, even though what's happening in my brain right now is very chaotic. And I think I find I when I'm making work, I enjoy bringing what's happening up here like to life, because for even performing that is much easier for me than measuring my language. So I think, but that can always be, there's a push and a pull there, because the chaos that's happening up here will not be clear to all audiences. It won't actually be, and nothing's truly accessible. But right now, I'm aware of having to like measure my language and say things in a way that kind of are somewhat like clear. And I think that's interesting, is when you sit in that space and go, what am I actually wanting to communicate, and how am I actually wanting to communicate it? Like my favorite things to write and read are just like streams of consciousness. Like one of my favorite books, I can't remember the title right now, is just a stream of consciousness from an American housewife. And I think it's got 3 pieces of punctuation in the entire book, and I think it's about 500 pages long. Because for me, that, like, a lot of people struggle with that work, but for me, that work's really accessible because it's how my brain works. I can understand it. The joy is in making something that you wish you had like read or seen or done when you were younger. I think there's like, art's always political, and we're always dealing with ideas and important, vital conversations, but sometimes there is just a real true joy in going, this is something that I wish I had access to, to make sense of my world. Because I mean, it's that thing in regards to language, like I always struggle with labeling things. The labels are very important, and boxes can be very important to make sense of the world around us. But I think I can struggle with labeling my work or myself within that work. But I kind of have to do so to give people an access point to engage with me and my work as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you've kind of found a clear division, I guess, between your individual practice and processing, and then, realizing there are qualities you really want to continue and explore, like, non-written histories and being an orator and a storyteller and holding that. And then as well, you realizing that kind of the language and storytelling you hold, you have to reframe in ways to access your audiences, but at the same time, you're equally trying to shift, a way and present them with a new way of thinking. I think that's really interesting. And it makes me think about the role of community and I guess peer dialogue and how that kind of plays into your relationship to language. Yeah, how does that work when you add community and peer dialogue?
I mean, it's hard. I think it's just about listening. I know it feels really somewhat easy to say, but just sitting and listening generously without kind of judgment. And I think that can be hard in very like spaces of activism and resistance as well. I think this is the thing, is that like change doesn't happen through just wanting change. It comes from listening and kind of building an understanding of what you want to change first. It's that thing when I talk about anti-disciplinary, I don't think about what I'm like the way I'm making something. I think about what I want to make, and and then that's the thing if you're talking about systems. And I think art and culture are very important when it comes to reflecting on the systems we engage with and where we want to move through. I think as as humans, all we want to do is just sit and yap and scroll things in the dirt all day. That's actually what we want to do, just look at the sky and go, that's nice.
I think you said something really beautiful when you talk about like activism, right? Because I think it has the word act in it, and then I think it makes it seem like this really like overcome movement and force. And I think it was beautiful that you switch it to being listening.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, Daley, because I know, you intersect a lot of communities that are, I feel like, for a lot of them, a really rich place of reclamation. I'd be curious about how you find yourself pivoting between intersectional identities and spaces in the process of reclamation. Like how do you navigate all those different communities? Do you find it's easier combining them all, or is there a sort of clarity in connecting and reclaiming when you could have individually address them?
I think ultimately I'm Māori first and almost only, in a way. Like I'm part of intersecting communities, I think, in a Western colonial context, because in a Western colonial context, like identities or struggles, as it were, fights for humanity are separated because they're easier to compress and get rid of if they're separated. And I think that's the thing with intersectionality, is that like I'm Māori ultimately, and nothing else. But then to communicate within a Western context, I'm also queer and disabled. And I think that's interesting, is that it's also about different contexts I'm engaging with. And I do live here on this continent, and like I do have to engage with that language, because it's important to engage with that language when there's work to do. Ultimately, it's that complex thing where there is, I would like to just be able to identify as what I am, as myself, but that focuses a lot on individualism rather than the community. And I think it's just being aware of the different contexts you exist in and the different languages you have to use. And I think there's a lot of good communities that are very good at code switching in that way and understanding different contexts. But it can be a lot of labor as well. And this is the thing, it's hard because there's a lot of, especially in regards to disability, there's a lot of research that points to pre-colonial Māori society is very accepting of disability, and it almost wasn't as separated as it is, in the context that I'm living in now. But it's that thing where there's also Māori we're kind of having to grapple with, okay, well, how do we explore this in our own way? And it's like my favorite word in talking about language is pakiwātanga, which is a word that was coined that kind of, for lack of a better word, bastardizes a few different Māori words and puts them together. And pakiwātanga essentially refers to in their own time and space, which is specifically used for autism, but could be used to describe any number of identities where one has had to resist the control of their time and space, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it could reference my queerness as well, existing in one's own time and space. And that's not saying existing separate or outside, but just the fact that we have to kind of approach each individual as an individual, and each community as its own community, and just kind of respect the needs of each other.
Yeah, I think you touch so eloquently, with those words of being like in their own time and space. And I think it's really beautiful perspective that you bring, talking about exactly the almost translator role that can happen between a non-Western gaze and a Western gaze. I guess how we choose to reclaim language to either almost like infiltrate institutions and those sort of platforms, and then when we reserve language that is just for communities, for those quiet spaces of resistance and care. Yeah. Can you say for just one more time that beautiful phrase, in their own time and space? I just feel like it wraps so nicely this whole conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, takiwatanga in their own time and space. And I think if I'm going to describe myself as anything, it would be that. Um, and I think the world in which I can describe myself as just that is a wonderful world. But maybe I won't see that within my lifetime, and that's okay. But you'd hope that. I think it's always working towards a place where we have to spend less time identifying and describing ourselves and just more time in community with each other.
Beautiful. Oh, that was like the perfect final statement, Daley. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your words. You're such like a fountain of like beautiful perspectives and language. I just very quickly, any upcoming projects that we should be on the lookout for?
The one I'd love for folks to come see is Takatapui, which will be happening later in this year. I can't say exactly where, but it will pop up if you do live on Gadigal country around Sydney. And, I'm not going to blow my own horn here, but I do approach language in a very specific way with that work and kind of challenge how we tell stories and how we remember things. And yeah,
Terrific.
I think it's a very important work for me.
Yeah, beautiful.
I hope people come along and enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Daley.
Thank you so much.
Now, Eliza Hull. Hi, Eliza. Thank you so much for joining us online today. For those that don't know you, which I think is nearly impossible, like you're such a beautiful artist, arts maker, singer, songwriter, storyteller, and advocate. I'm very curious about how those mediums, writing, performance, and activism, have shaped your artistic practice.
Yeah, I guess they are everything I think about all at once. For a long time, they were very separated. And so I guess probably singing was the first thing that happened for me when I was about 5. So I started singing really young.
Wow.
It wasn't until I was leaving high school that I decided I'd like to do writing. I mean, I'd been kind of writing in my journals all through high school, but yeah, thought that would be a nice career, I guess, to work in writing or journalism. And so I went to uni at age 18 and studied media and communications. And I guess that was always the backup plan to do that if music wasn't, something that I could live off. And music has been a up and down career. So I think it's been really nice to have all of those different areas. And in the last, I guess, 8 or so years, I've also stepped into more advocacy. So that was, I guess, just feeling like there were certain parts of my life where I really noticed the underrepresentation of disabled people in the arts space, in the music space, and also in the parenting space. And so when I noticed that was like, okay, maybe I can use these forms of artistic practice and communication like writing and journalism and music to, I guess, change people's minds about, what it means to be disabled and change, I guess, or hopefully change the way that we do, things in those artistic spaces. So something that I've been really advocating for that's quite simple is just less stairs onto stages, ramps up onto stages, ramps up onto award ceremonies. Because I guess, again, that's going back to my own personal experience when I was a teenager. I remember watching the ARIAs and really seeing all these great musical artists accept awards, and they would run up and down multiple stairs. And I just really strongly remember that feeling of, I could not get up those stairs. So there's no chance of me ever being able to accept an award like that. And I think that messaging that I told myself of not possible is something I really want to change for future generations.
Yeah, I think it's really great how you speak to, almost the intrinsic relationship between being an artist and being an advocate, and just how naturally there seems to be this continual, webbing together to exactly create change. Like, you know, if you didn't want to be an artist, you might not have watched like the RAs with the same sort of vigor for change, and you know, knowing that that was a space you can activate, and only because of, you know, also wanting to be an artist and an arts maker and an advocate, it like hybrided up to create those small changes which can, you know, be so enormous for our community. You've done a lot of work independently, but naturally like community and peer dialogue plays a lot, you know, in language and stories. And I'm very curious, with your expertise and experience, how do you feel like community and peer dialogue have, you know, kind of evolved language and stories over time?
I guess I feel like it's an ever-evolving landscape, and for me, community has been everything. Like, it really, truly has. And I'll never forget, just going back many years ago, I went to what was Arts Access Australia's meeting place that unfortunately is no longer. It was a great, I guess, an example of real community building and learning about different language. In fact, I rarely heard the word disability in my life growing up. It was often a problem, or seen as a condition, or even called it as disease, which for me is fine, but it actually is, there's no real truth behind that. It's actually, you know, if you look in that medical space, it's actually classed as a disorder, but it was often just kind of very medicalized growing up. And it wasn't until kind of coming together a meeting place where I got to hear all these, you know, I guess people that were further along in their journey of identifying with the word disability, or even feeling proud about it. I was like, whoa, you know, this is really different. And it kind of showed me the power of language, the power of storytelling. Yeah, I guess that realization that community is everything. And without it, you can feel very isolated and alone. And that was probably why for so long it took me so long to ever feel comfortable with myself, or comfortable to be an artist with disability. And we then, going back to meeting place, it was also the first time that I took my socks off in front of people, where because I have feet that look really different. I have toes that are clawed toes, and I have scars all over my feet, and my feet are what is classed as deformed feet. And so there I was with all these community members I'd never met before, dancing, where we were, you know, laying on the ground and expressing ourselves in artistic ways, and there was beautiful music playing. And yeah, I was like, I don't need to hide in these spaces, and the language that we're using is so empowering and beautiful. And actually, this is just that realization that I've really been just fed a lie throughout my life, that disability is a negative deficit and something that I should hide about myself. And it really was that kind of first breakthrough, I guess, of like, this is me. Like, yeah. So I think that community building is just so powerful, and also language that happens within those communities where it can be really turned around is something that I never take for granted.
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful that you're talking about like these ways that, you know, we can continually reclaim identity and language, and, you know, how the power of community really informs the ways we can do it. From your perspective, what are ways you think we can reframe it, you know, these ideas and words?
Yeah, I find that interesting, because I think I often feel like when you meet, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this terminology around, when you meet one disabled person, you meet one disabled person, in that we are all very different in the way that we identify. And I think that's been a big learning curve for me, because I would often, there were times where I was really, it was so interesting actually, because I kind of hid myself and didn't want to talk about it. And then I became really strong in what I believed in when it came to language. And I have to be honest, there were times where I would, if someone didn't want to use the word disability, I would kind of get my back up a little bit. I'd be like, but that, you know, you're just perpetuating this kind of hiding of identity, and you're making it harder for us all. And but now I guess I've become a bit more calm in it all, less fiery. And I actually just think it's great that we all identify in different ways. And I've got friends that identify as differently abled, or even don't use the word disability when, I guess from an outward perspective, you would class that person as having a disability. And for me, there are words that I'm still not comfortable with. And the word crip is something that we have as disabled people reclaimed because it's been a word that's been used negatively, and therefore it's kind of that stepping into that to go, well, I don't care that much that I'm going to reclaim that word. But for me, I still struggle with that word because as a teenager, that was the word that all the I guess mostly boys in my class would use against me and write little messages to each other with worse words, but it would always have crippled with it. And for me, that was just such a painful time that I can't reclaim that word. So I find that tricky, but I think that that's okay. Like, it's okay that some of us do and some of us don't, and that's what makes the world diverse. And I think that we want that. We want different perspectives coming through. We don't want it to feel like we all just agree with everything and we all identify in the same way, because that's what makes our community so beautiful, because it's diverse.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful thing to really focus on, like self-autonomy and identity when it comes to words and ideas to reclaim in our community. And I love that you share the vulnerability, being like, there are some words, I just can't reclaim, or not at that stage, or it doesn't speak to me. I think that's really awesome dialogue to hear from someone who's been in a public facing figure in community, and I really appreciate you sharing that. With your writing, you've also been writing for some younger audiences, which I think is such lush space for disability storytelling that hasn't been as navigated. We've kind of had tropes of disabled characters in scripts, or the typical theatre, but younger audiences is really interesting. And I'm very curious about your work shifting the way we talk about disability with younger readers and audiences. How do you do it?
It's been so beautiful. And I think it is really important because they are the future generations. And from the work that I've done in this space, I feel really excited by the future, because I think kids in this time are just getting so much more disability awareness. Like, it's still not really in the curriculum, but in terms of the books that kids are really able to access is just, it's incredible. So I feel really privileged to go into those spaces and read the book. And I think kids are so honest. So I feel like that is really fun. Like, I always love to say, what's a disability? Like, that's the first thing I say. What does it mean to be disabled? And what are the ways that we can make the world better for disabled people? And explaining the social model of disability to kids is kind of like seeing it happen in real time. When it happened for me, it's like, mind blow of like kids go, it's not the person that needs to change, it's the world, and that we can, make a ramp and all these other ways. Some of the kids are the most inventive in terms of things that I hadn't thought about, of like ways to be more accessible for people. Is just like, I think that's really exciting to tip it around, again, taking it away from deficit or medicalized, and showing kids that everyone's different, and that's what makes the world great, and that actually we can change the world to be more accessible and inclusive. And it really starts with you as right now.
I think that's really beautiful that you're talking about children stepping in almost earlier on into these roles of advocates in a way. And I would love to know, like, what is coming up like next for you? What are you most excited about?
I've just released the new children's book called The World We Can Build, which is about the social model of disability. It follows two kids as they navigate an inaccessible world, and one has a disability and one doesn't. And then they create a new world together. Or they, start to plan a new world. It's been great to share that and teach kids about the social model. And then now I've got a new children's book that will come out next year with Naz Campanella. And it's about how really just the day in the life of a blind child. We've worked really closely on that one together, which has been, beautiful. And I'm really in the depths of making a new record right now. So I've just got back from London 2 days ago and spent 2 weeks there writing with lots of songwriters over there. And I guess that was a real challenge for me. I think just noticing my energy levels at how that really impacted my time there, but also just learning that limitations are real, but that it's okay it's again that self-acceptance, moving into that it's okay to rest. And it's so I think a bit of rest is needed right now, but also really excited about making this new record and just get it out there and hope to be able to keep going. Is the one friend that I've had all my life, and I definitely don't want to lose it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Eliza, for our time to chat.
Oh, thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Access Ideas and Insights. This podcast is proudly produced by Accessible Arts and Kiera Brew, Kurec, with sound design by Tralala Blip. Access consulting was provided by Macro Impact Consulting and our advisory group. We also thank our Auslan interpreters. This podcast series is proudly supported by the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales, the principal funding partner of Accessible Arts.